For me, basically, the difference between Baroque music and the other kind of music is that I feel that I can express all my feelings, in fact. I have more freedom to express this. And maybe I know that there are another kind of music, of styles, that you can do it also. But for me, I feel more comfortable with this music.
What the quality is, it's just a very different way of writing music and also a different way of playing this music then. And the music we play in this concert is really from the end of the 16th century and the beginning of the 17th, where a big change was in composing music. Before it was quite polyphonic and vocal music, and then it starts being even instrumental. And this is very interesting on this program, to focus on that, how it changed, or how the values change from vocal to instrumental music. That I like a lot on this kind of stuff we play now.
19th century music, a big romantic era, has a totally different aesthetic than what we got after the Second World War, due to big difference in the society also. Also, we live totally different than in the 19th century. So already music from the 19th century, which is not so old, it's only 100 years old, but already we played in the wrong way. We don't play it as it was meant to be played. It's, for instance, all the beginnings of notes, all the stresses. Right now we play quite firm, a lot of accents, a lot of stress on the first. We know when we listen to old recordings, there are already some early recordings from the 19th century. Virtually every tone starts in a small crescendo. They start like, it's never like puff. And now, for the last 50 years, the most important thing is beat and the accent. So it is the music, the way the contemporary orchestras play it is probably just totally wrong. It's not. It's just not as it was supposed to be played.
With Baroque music, the challenge is, in a way, it's more fun. I think as a singer you have to change the way that you produce your voice depending on the obligato instruments that you are singing with. So you have to be more of a chameleon. When you're singing 20th century music, there's always the challenges of pitching music, and the music is more difficult in a way to get inside, in a way that I think people have become more complex to understand. And I think you get the complexities of the person, of the composer in the music, in a way that you don't with Baroque music.
From, let's say, 18th century and before, there are not so many like important schools, you know. We have in the 19th century music and 20th century music, we have, for instance, Russian piano school. So you have to get into this, you have to know everything about this, you have to have a certain style, but then probably you just play the music, you rehearse it after the methods that they write about, you know, just use the methods that they are using. For the 18th century music, obviously we don't have their methods, we only have their school books. We have the books that they wrote how to play this music. So obviously it probably needs more of intellectual work, not just technical work, just in order to get the right style, you know, and to see what needs to be practiced, because the music itself is just notes.
Baroque music was created 300 years ago. There are no recordings of how the music was originally played. Some manuscripts and music scores remain, of course. But how important is the overall knowledge of the era, its lifestyle, society and culture for historically informed performance?
Early music is a broad term, so we have recordings from 100 years ago, and they are already much different from the style we are playing, most people are playing in now. So we see that the style has changed a lot. Things that appeal to us today are not the same that appealed to the people 100 years ago, and probably we will never be able to realize everything and to say, so this is how they sounded. It's much more that we use some ideas. We read, sometimes we can read about them in text, like manuals about how to play an instrument, or what the music was like if somebody described a performance or something. And then, of course, we have old instruments and also paintings. We can reconstruct this instrument and then learn a lot from the instruments. And of course, we have the most important thing is the music. So we can look at the music. Sometimes it's, for example, it's very interesting to look at different versions of one piece to see what was important to a composer and what was not. And if he worked on a piece later, then it's what he changed after the first version. So we can perhaps see what was the important thing, or we can analyze the music, of course, but that's the problem. We don't know how much they analyzed in the past. Although I have to say that most musicians back then, they had to compose. They were not only instrumentalists, but they were also composers. So I think they knew a lot about this music. I mean, they knew how it was put together.
Well, I mean, of course, nowadays you have access to so much information. So we in a way, performing Baroque music now compared to even 60 years ago, we have so much more knowledge than we did then. And of course it's interesting, but I don't necessarily know if it influences you. It can affect your performance, but it doesn't influence your performance, because I think the music of the Baroque period is so strong as music. But then I suppose one could argue that with our modern ears and the fact that we've gone through the Romantic period and we've gone through the 20th century period of music, that you hark back to it, so you will never ever have a true feeling of the freshness that they had when this music was being written. In the same way with architecture, you know, you can imagine when these huge, massive cathedrals were being built, how thrilling this was. But for us, we're used to it. You're almost disappointed if you go to a city and there's not an amazing, impressive cathedral to look at. So it's very hard to go back in time and to imagine how you would change your interpretation, I think.